news, a federal judge has just ruled that Donald Trump, well, let me put it in context. John Eastman, who was the guy who was advising Donald Trump's legal strategy to have Vice President Pence refuse to accept electors from states, from the swing states that Trump lost, and instead accept the phony electors, right? He was the guy behind this whole thing with the phony electoral votes. He was using the email account of his university. And so the January 6th committee subpoenaed the university and said, we want to see those emails between Eastman and Trump, or Eastman and Trump's people, and see what the deal was. It was between Eastman and Trump, but Trump doesn't have email, but you get, mob bosses never do, right? Mob bosses always do everything through their subordinates. But in any case, so this federal judge, his name is David Carter, he's in Los Angeles, U.S. District Court. He just ruled, he said, based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. He goes on to say, our nation was founded on the peaceful transition of power epitomized by George Washington laying down his sword to make way for democratic elections. It was a 44-page ruling. He said, ignoring this history, President Trump vigorously campaigned for the vice president to single-handedly determine the results of the 2022 election. With a plan this bold, President Trump knowingly tried to subvert this fundamental principle. And then he takes this argument that Eastman was making, that the Electoral Count Act of 1787 or 89 was unconstitutional. He says, believing the Electoral Count Act was unconstitutional does not give President Trump a license to violate it. Disagreeing with the law entitles Trump to seek a remedy in court, not to disrupt a constitutionally mandated process. And President Trump knew how to pursue election claims in court. After filing and losing more than 60 suits, this plan was a last-ditch attempt to secure the presidency by any means. This is not changing the world in any huge way. It is going to give the committee some documents. But it's also a big deal in that this is a federal judge. This will raise the pressure on Merrick Garland to do something. We so far have no evidence whatsoever that the Justice Department is investigating Donald Trump. And typically when there is an investigation, you have all kinds of evidence, because you have people coming out of grand jury rooms going, holy cow, or I'm angry, or whatever. None of that happening. It looks like, Garland's just doing whatever Garland does. I don't know, bowling? But anyhow. But I wanted to talk about also what's happening in Davis, California, and the zero COVID approach. Laura Spinney wrote a great piece over at The Guardian. It's titled, The Zero COVID Approach Got Bad Press, but it worked, and it could work again. And basically what she's talking about, there were countries, China is the most prominent, and of course they're being bit in the backside in some ways by this right now, that tried to prevent COVID altogether by having lockdowns and mask mandates and regular testing and all that kind of thing. And it largely worked until Omicron came along. And now Omicron has punched through the holes in that, particularly in Hong Kong, and China has a bit of a problem. But what she's pointing out is that for a time, you can limit the spread of a disease and it's potentially controllable. And then it hits a point where you just can't control it. It's out of control. And that's obviously what happened here in the United States. That's not what happened in China. They did control it. Now, they should have used that time to get everybody vaccinated, but at least in Hong Kong, you've got large chunks of the population who are not vaccinated, and thus it's kind of melting down. But she points out, Laura Spinney in her article points out what's going on in Davis, California. This is absolutely fascinating. Davis, California is a college town, and 77,000 people live in town, and then you've got the college campus as well. That's around 15,000 people living on campus. And the college got together with the town, and this was funded by the college initially, although the town later got, COVID funds and pandemic funds and whatnot to do this, and has just, made the town basically COVID-free. They start out with this, she starts out with this story. Once a week, Lori Janich drives down the street from her office and partakes in an ongoing success story. Phone in hand to confirm her appointment, she strolls into the large activities and recreation center on the campus at UC Davis, reaches a COVID-19 testing station, swirls water in her mouth, spits into a tube, and leaves. Within a day, she receives her test result. And then this is an article over at the Sacramento Bee, sacbee.com, by Mark Kreidler. He notes, the same goes, he says, everything about the COVID-19 testing process is free. The same goes for all UC Davis students, faculty members, and staffers, Davis City residents, local workers, and visitors, anyone whose life brings them into the town. And points out this experiment, basically putting the university and its adjoining city into a health bubble, has delivered incredible results. Free saliva-based testing. You don't have to stick anything up your nose. You just spit into a tube. Free vaccinations, free masks, and the city pays for isolation or quarantine housing if you test positive. The city is also regularly testing their city wastewater, and they're routinely screening children in the local school, again using spit tests. Plus, UC Davis has put together a 200-person, essentially, army. They call them health ambassadors, and they hired a local PR firm to get the message out. In this article, they note that you can't walk a block in the city without seeing signs about, the importance of doing this, of keeping COVID down. Right now, I mean, this article was published on March 7th. It was, 2 weeks ago. Davis's cumulative COVID-19 infection rate, he notes, is roughly half the statewide average. In January 2020, when California was experiencing a 17% test positivity rate, Davis's weekly average came in just above 1%. This past January, 3 months ago, two and a half months ago, as Omicron pushed state positivity rates above 20%, Davis's weekly average never got above 5%. So what Laura Spinney is proposing over at The Guardian, and it's a great piece. There's just a hot link in it into the story about Davis, but that's, I think, really the big story, is basically what New Zealand did, and China and some of these other countries. And her point is, if you combine these kinds of mitigation strategies with an aggressive vaccination strategy, between the two, you end up with a COVID-free environment. And that's like a good thing. That's a desirable thing. I mean, given that there was a piece about this in the New York Times last I think it was Friday, maybe it was Saturday. In fact, it must have been Saturday because I didn't talk about it on the air, and I copied it to my family, I recall. About how about a third of people who get symptomatic COVID end up with long COVID. Between 10 and 30%. I'm using the high end of the range, but that's what they said, between 10 and 30% as far as they can tell. Right now, people who get symptomatic COVID, it becomes long COVID. And about a third of those people, for their symptoms of long COVID, they're experiencing extreme fatigue and or dementia, brain fog. And in fact, there was a piece in the New York Times on Sunday about how the brain fog of COVID appears to be using the same mechanism, the same basically brain damage that people get called chemo brain. When people go on chemotherapy, they end up with brain fog as well. So if you've got, half of people who get COVID are symptomatic, and of those who are symptomatic, a third of them get long COVID, so that's now a sixth of the people who got COVID. And of the people who are symptomatic and get long COVID, a third of them, what's a sixth of a third of a sixth? That would be 2%, right? No, it would be, man, I just can't do math that fast. It would be 1/3 of a sixth of them. I'm lousy with math in my head. My apology. I remember numbers well, like dates and things, but I can't do math in my head. So anyway, it's just like, why do this? Why have this? Why experience this if if there are options, if it's possible to get out of it? So, is your town doing anything about this? Is your state doing anything about this? Increasingly in the United States, we're just saying, hey, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And what that's going to mean is that particularly in states or in counties in states that have very low vaccination rates, we're going to see probably another big spike in hospitalizations and illness coming down the road in another month or so, just as the COVID funds have been cut off.